the one-on-one meeting. Let's listen in and see what we can find out, and then I'll have a question for you on the back end, Richard. Stand by.
261, since we met last time in Singapore in June last year.
Yes. 오늘 또다시는 훌륭한 상봉이 마련되게 된 건 각하의 그 남다른 통큰 정치적 결단이 안아온이라고 생각합니다.
And I truly believe that this successful and great meeting that we're having today is thanks to a courageous decision, political decision that Honorable Minister President made.
그 261일 동안 그 사이 공은 사방에 불신과 오해 있는 소리들도 있고 그 적극적인 낡은 관행이 우리가 가는 길을 막으려고 했지만 우리는 그것들을 다 애들고 극복하고 해서 다시 마주 걸어서 261일 만에 여기 하노이까지 걸어왔습니다.
So during that 261 days since we last met, there have been misunderstandings. There have been, these eyes from the world who are misunderstanding our situation. And there was some hostility that still remained from the very, very past period, that from the outside. But however, we have been able to overcome all those obstacles, and here we are today, after 261 days in Hanoi.
그 기간이 때문에 생각해보면 좀 어느 때보다도 많은 그 고민과 노력 그리고 그 인내가 필요했던 그런 기간이었던 것 같습니다.
I truly believe that those 261 days were the days during which a lot of painstaking efforts were necessary, and also a lot of patience were needed.
이런 오늘 여기서 이렇게 만났습니다. 이번에 보다 더 모든 사람들이 반기는 그런 훌륭한 결과가 만들어질 거라고 확신하고 또 그렇게 되기 위해서 최선을 다하겠습니다.
But here we are today, sitting next to each other, and that gives us a hope that we will be successful this time, and I would really try to make that happen.
Thank you very much. That's really nice. Well, I wanted to say it's an honor to be with Chairman Kim. It's an honor to be together in really a country, Vietnam, where they've really rolled out the red carpet, and they're very honored to have us. And it's great to be with you. We had a very successful first summit. I felt it was very successful, and some people would like to see it go quicker. I'm satisfied, you're satisfied. We want to be happy with what we're doing. But I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first. And we made a lot of progress, and I think the biggest progress was our relationship is really a good one.
네, 대단히 감사합니다. 김정은 위원장님 다시 만나게 되어서 영광입니다. 그리고 또 오늘 같이 하게 되어서 또 매우 기쁩니다. 우리가 베트남에서 만났습니다. 베트남이 아주 우리를 굉장히 환영을 하고 레드카펫을 깐 것처럼 그렇게 환영하고 있습니다. 우리는 첫 번째 그 정상회담을 굉장히 성공적으로 마쳤습니다. 어떤 사람들은 우리의 어떤 진전이 더 빨리 갔으면 하고 그렇게 원하는 사람도 있지만 내가 보기에는 우리가 상당히 잘하고 있고 또 첫 번째 그 정상회담이 굉장히 성공적이었습니다. 이번 회담도 첫 번째 것과 같은 성공 또는 아니면 더 성공하기를 바라고 있습니다. 그리고 우리는 아마 이번에 더 많은 진전을 이룰 것 같습니다.
And as I've said many times, and I say it to the press, I say it to anybody that wants to listen, I think that your country has tremendous economic potential, unbelievable, unlimited. And I think that you will have a tremendous future with your country, a great leader. And I look forward to watching it happen and helping it to happen. And we will help it to happen.
우리 여러 번 제가 얘기를 했고 또 언론들한테도 제가 여러 번 했습니다만은 저는 조선이 엄청난 경제적인 잠재력을 가지고 있다라고 그렇게 생각합니다. 그리고 앞으로 큰 성공을 이룰 거로 생각합니다. 위대한 지도자 밑에서 아주 잘할 거로 생각합니다. 그리고 앞으로 그러한 성공을 저는 계속 보게 되기를 기대하고 있습니다.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. And we're going to go have dinner. And then we have some big meetings scheduled for tomorrow. And we'll see you, I guess, at a news conference at some point during the day. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, do you have any reaction to Michael Cohen and his testimony?
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
All right. right, the president appearing to refuse to take any questions about Michael Cohen. Usually he likes to dive right into that stuff, staying away from it. Just finishing his one-on-one meeting with Kim Jong-un, and the big takeaways are he says their relationship is very good, and that's where the most improvement has been between his relationship and Kim Jong-un. And he also said that his country has tremendous economic potential, and he looks forward to helping that happen for them. Kelly O'Donnell, covering this, joins us now. Kelly, what can we expect next?
Well, there will be an ongoing one-on-one meeting without the cameras there from the White House pool. So the conversation will continue with the interpreters in the room, but not the wider delegation. And you heard the president emphasize maybe the biggest progress, as he describes it, is in the relationship. So tonight's social dinner, emphasis on social, seems to be a big part of what President Trump is focused on here, that his relationship with Kim Jong-un and how he has sort of worked on that, and what they've each done is an achievement on its own, which is not necessarily what the wider world would be looking to give high marks. Certainly relationship is a part of politics and very much a part of diplomacy, but will there be an effort to still focus on things like denuclearization? The president was asked by the pool reporters if he has backed away from denuclearization as a requirement. He said no. Also did not engage on the issue of whether the Korean War, which is still technically active in a diplomatic sense, could be brought to an end as a part of this discussion. He did not engage on that. That would be a benefit to North Korea because they could get some sanctions relief, be more a part of the international community. At the same time, because that war is still considered an active war, even though the U.S. is not fighting, it's been generations since the Korean War, it does give the United States a way to have an umbrella of security for our friends in South Korea and allies in the region. So, a social meeting tonight, a dinner. The big discussion happens tomorrow. You heard the president preview a press conference, and maybe that's where we'll get his first snapshot judgment of how this all went. Mika?
All right, Kelly O'Donnell in Hanoi, Vietnam. An incredible day, the split screen of the president in Vietnam and, of course, Michael Cohen, who's testifying in Congress open session, who will be talking about the Trump Tower project and how President Trump implicitly asked him to lie about it. He's expected to say that he knows that Trump lied about his wealth a great deal, that Mr. Cohen was given a reimbursement for payments to porn star Stormy Daniels to try and quiet her at the very end of the campaign. Michael Cohen, in the draft of his opening testimony, is going to apologize to Melania for lying to her. And he also is going to say that as a candidate, Mr. Trump wanted Michael Cohen to write letters to his high school, college, and other entities, threatening them not to release his transcripts. So this all happening today side by side with this incredible summit. Once again, the president meeting in Vietnam for the second time with Kim Jong-un. Willie?
Yeah, extraordinary pictures. We're watching them again here. And joining us now, former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs and former Special Advisor to President Clinton and Policy Coordinator on North Korea, Ambassador Wendy Sherman. She's also an MSNBC contributor. Ambassador, great to have you with us this morning as we watch what just unfolded. The President of the United States saying it's an honor to be with Chairman Kim, calling their first summit, the one in Singapore last June, quote, a great success. He said there's been a lot of progress and says our relationship is a really good one. What's the best case scenario? You know North Korea well. You've watched how the country behaves. You know what it's willing to do and what it's not willing to do. Richard Haass is not alone in saying he finds it impossible that North Korea would ever give up the one thing it has in the world, which is its nuclear weapons program. So what is the point of this exercise? What can President Trump extract from North Korea here?
Well, Willie, we certainly hope the president succeeds in getting North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons and its long-range ballistic missiles. But on the day that Michael Cohen will call the president of the United States a con man, I'm with Richard. I'm afraid we're going to see a bit of a con in Hanoi, Vietnam today. The president is really looking here to deflect a photo op I do agree that I think that Kim Jong-un will put something positive on the table. It may be to dismantle some of Yongbyon, which is his major nuclear facility where most of the fissile material is made, if not pretty much all of it. But I don't think it will be a lot. I don't think it will be verifiable in the way that it needs to be. And it appears that the United States is ready to give Kim Jong-un quite a bit. Liaison offices in our country and us having one there, a political declaration that says that the Korean War is over, probably perhaps even providing waivers to South Korea for some economic development. The president knows how to build buildings. He wants to create a Riviera for Kim Jong-un, but I don't think anybody's lining up to visit that particular resort today.
But, Richard, we heard a lot of these promises or draft promises from North Korea coming out of the Singapore summit last June. Remember, there was that paper statement that said it intended to denuclearize. President Trump took that immediately to say North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat. That, of course, isn't the case. What can he get here from Kim Jong-un?
Well, again, you'll get some dismantlement of select facilities.
But will he actually do it? Because there's indications that he's not doing it.
Well, he may do it with some of his old facilities. But at the same time, there'll be stuff going on that will increase the amount of nuclear material they have. They'll do covert testing, even if they don't do overt testing. But let's make a couple of points. One is all presidents think that their personal relationships with their foreign adversaries, I mean, FDR did it with Stalin. Every president exaggerates that. Other leaders are not seduced. They have their own national interests. This is just it on steroids. Second of all, North Korea wants sanctions relief. It does not want massive economic reform because Kim Jong-un understands that would mean the end of his political power. So he's not looking to have hundreds of hotels and American businessmen and tourists there. He wants very selective flows to do this. I want to get back to something Wendy raised, to get her view on it, which is the risks potentially of ending the state of war. And whether this is something we want to have, whether Wendy thinks that, or whether this is dangerous, Wendy, because this could basically then further undermine the pressure to keep sanctions in place. People will say, the war's over, now we can sort of have a normal relationship with the North. How much does that worry you?
Well, I actually think there are two risks, Richard. The one that you point out, which is that people will lift sanctions. The Chinese and the Russians are already, in essence, easing up on the sanctions. But it also says to the world that we are disengaging from Asia. That, in fact, the war is over, we're on to a new time. And when you add this sense of disengagement from all the other things the president is doing, pulling out of Syria, pulling out of Afghanistan, putting NATO in question, the American people don't want our troops to stay overseas forever. We all agree with that. But this constant disengagement from the world only makes Xi Jinping of China and Vladimir Putin of Russia happy guys.
So, Ambassador Wendy Sherman, given your experience, I would understand that you've helped prepare for situations like this and preparing world leaders to be at their best during a summit like this. How concerned would you be if the President of the United States was tweeting about his former fixer's sleazy testimony just an hour before a moment like this?
Indeed. It makes no sense to me at all. One, he is really underscoring the story of Michael Cohen as opposed to the serious negotiation he's supposed to be undertaking. He really is giving fuel and energy to the story back home at exactly the point where he should be serious and presidential and focused on the very difficult negotiation in front of him. It is quite dismaying.
Well, and Donny Deutsch, if you look at the draft of what Michael Cohen is going to say before he's even asked any questions, this is incredibly revealing information about the president's behavior in the lead up to the campaign finance violations, a check that President Trump himself signed that might be proving these reimbursements to a porn star. Beyond the fact that this is so unbecoming to the President of the United States, it also potentially could put the president in very hot water. There is evidence potentially coming to the table today.
Yeah, just back to Korea for a second. When we look at those pictures, and as Donald Trump talks about what an honor it is, let us never forget he's sitting next to a despot. He's sitting next to a guy that runs a police state. He's sitting next to a guy that starves his people. He's sitting next to a guy who killed his brother, who killed journalists. And Donald Trump takes our brand and puts it on equal footing with that brand.
Killed an American college student.
American college student. He is endorsing that brand. He is endorsing that mode of behavior. And as Richard lays out, there's nothing. This is another Donald Trump production, just like the Caravan was, just like the Wall is, just like his imaginary friends are. There's zero possibility. You don't have to be a diplomat to understand that he's not giving up his nukes in any way, shape, or form. That's the reason he exists. He owns a country. He doesn't want to give that up. It's very simple. And this is a charade, and I think it's despicable that we as a country continue to have to live under the veil of a guy who needs to produce things for his own sense of ego and self-esteem. And it's easy to lose sight. Let's watch that and think about who he's shaking hands with.
John Meacham, as we look at these photographs and you think about the course of history, who presidents have met with, sometimes, as Richard points out, it's somebody like Stalin. What is Kim Jong-un getting out of this photograph that we're looking at right now, these images? What do they do for him?
The fact that we're looking at them and talking about them. This is a Marshall McLuhan moment, right? I mean, the medium is the message. He's being elevated and affirmed as a rational actor in the family of nations. And I don't think it's much more complicated than that. One of the things that connects these two unfolding stories about how Trump got to power and how he operates, which we'll see on Capitol Hill, is this is the cost of that. And it's complicated, and Richard and Wendy can check me on this, but diplomacy is often about talking, in fact, more often than not, it's about talking to people with whom you have virulent and existential disagreements. But because Trump personalizes everything, and all presidents, to be sure, are prone to this. As Richard pointed out, Churchill and Roosevelt's staff used to go crazy when Roosevelt and Churchill would be with Stalin, because they would get together and they would all think that they could solve the world's problems, and then it would take the staff 6 months to undo whatever agreement they'd come to over vodka. But so there is a peril of symmetry. It can be wonderful. It can also be quite perilous. What I think we're seeing here is this produced version of the presidency that is about Trump's odd, and I'm going to keep saying it's odd, although it may not be odd that much anymore, odd affinity for authoritarian figures. And I mean, Wendy, does that track for you?
Absolutely. I was sitting here and thinking when Madeleine Albright and I went to Pyongyang, and we're at a banquet, and obviously they pass around soju, which is the real drink of the Koreas. She got enormous criticism. Just enormous, right, for being in the same room, for going to this enormous stadium event. When she came out, she said, I have no rose-colored glasses on. I grew up under communism. I get what this is all about. President Obama, during the Iran negotiation, never embraced President Rouhani, or the supreme leader of Iran, as it was. He was highly criticized for even allowing a negotiation to go forward. When John Kerry took a walk with Javad Zarif in a park for 15 minutes. Both he and Zarif got withering criticism for looking like they were normal people. So it says a lot about, as Donnie was saying, the production that we have all come to expect from President Trump, that we are all just sort of taking this in, that this bromance that he has with Kim Jong-un is literally in front of our eyes turning into a wedding ceremony, and indeed that this has to be about more than photo ops and love letters. It has to be about seriously concerning ourselves with the security of the United States of America.
And there are concerns that the president does not have that on his mind this morning. In about 10 minutes, we'll be seeing pictures, live pictures of the two leaders having dinner together. The president, of course, saying that the two leaders are in love and have a special relationship. And just moments ago, he said that the best thing about what is happening in this summit is that their relationship is really, really good. Secretary Mike Pompeo will be at the dinner along with Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. We'll be able to get a glimpse of that side by side with another story that will be breaking later today, and that is the president's former fixer who will be testifying before Congress, open testimony today. It is expected that he will call the president a racist, a con man, and a cheat, and will provide evidence to some of this, and will be speaking his mind for the first time with nothing left to lose, because Michael Cohen is going to prison, and nothing, he says today, will reduce his prison time. He wants to set the record straight. We'll be right back with much more breaking developments.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.